Well, so I over the past few weeks, I've tried to sort of make a few videos, and I sort of feel like I've lost my oomph, shall we say? Obviously, when you kind of take a back seat and stop making videos for a time, it can be kind of hard to get back into the swing of things. And you've no idea how many attempts I've made. And then becoming sort of conscious of the fact that I'm rambling, like I'm ironically doing right now. You kind of get a pass when you're doing a stream, but rambling or you make mistakes. Now, back in the day, I would go back and sort of edit out my mistakes and whatnot. Um, I did consider maybe sort of putting it into script format, but I don't really operate that way. Very much prefer to sort of react to things in real time and whatnot. But anyway, I came across a few things that I felt compelled to speak about. Um, and I'm going to do so in just a second. But it's quite interesting, the first comment that came up even before I went live there from Roscoe, who says that sorry for assuming your gender there, but I'm assuming you're a boy, a man even. He works in a secondary school, and every wall is coming down with anti-white propaganda and militant LGBT madness. Obviously, all year round, you're going to see, especially in Scottish schools. Sorry, the LGBT BS anecdotal in your part, I know, but I can also echo that comment there by anecdotes that I know of, purely by my mother's friend works in a school, and it's wall-to-wall LGBT stuff on every wall as well. And we know this anyway from pretty much every single parent you ever speak to up and down the country. As far as the anti-white nonsense is concerned, this is Black History Month now, pretty sure anyway. So I expect to see a lot more in that regard. Thankfully, that nonsense seems to die down ever so slightly when October comes to pass. But let's not get away from what the title of the stream suggests. There is great murmurs behind the scenes that have been going on for some time in regards to critical race theory, so-called anti-racist education, and it's not going away anytime soon. If anything, it seems to be intensifying to a certain extent. So before I get into some of that, I'll go through some of the people that have arrived. I always hate doing live streams by myself because I feel like a ball bag at the start. You have to wait for people to come in, and then you have to make small talk, cyberly speaking. It's just very strange. There's Sensum. Ordinarily, I probably would have invited you on for this purely because we've done similar streams in the past, but a bit short notice, bud, and I didn't really want to bombard you with nonsense. So you can take a back seat for now and drink your Lamborghinis. Budgie Burger, as always, good to see you, bud. Steve Cray, good to see you, bud. PBC, hello, beautiful. Anybody else in here like Jack London? What like? And there might very well be more comments, but I don't have YouTube up on our tab, so I do apologise if StreamYard has prohibited me from seeing your based in red pill hot takes. So anyway, on that note, I might as well get straight into it, really. There's no beating around the bush when it's just you yourself on a panel. And building racial literacy, something I've spoken about for probably the best part of 2 years now. Anti-racist education, obviously, is how it sort of masquerades itself, but it is critical race theory, as I have proven for years. And I'm simply going to do something now that I don't think I've actually shown on stream before. I'm going to show you my very first video on the subject, right? And I'm not playing the whole thing. I'm just going to show you the section that they cut out. They edited this webpage in the Scottish Government's webpage literally within a week of me posting this video, right? Where they speak specifically about, reforming Scottish academia via or using a critical race theory framework. So, yeah, let me get this tab open. I've got a few tabs. Hopefully the laptop won't start refreshing things. That'd be lovely, jumply. Here we go. All right. So I'll share my screen now, because this is very important. These people who hide behind the facade of we're just simply promoting anti-racism, it's lies. It's comical, really. One in particular who's now doing the rounds again, I'll come on to soon. So let's get this tab open. I will then mute my mic because I don't want echoes.
here that the curriculum reform subgroup identified early on the need to review the existing curriculum framework to seek opportunities to meaningfully embed and articulate race equality and anti-racism, right? And to establish the key principles and features of any future curriculum reform. A small review and design group was created in 2022, January 2022, to take this forward. The vision for this group, is this where the bombshell is dropped? Or is this a separate one? Oh, this could be your lucky day, folks, if it is. I can't recall. But anyhow, right, we will find out in due course. The subgroup has a vision that Scotland's schools and early learning environments will promote, right? They will promote and embed racial equity, anti-racism, and global citizenship through its systems, leadership, and curriculum using, drumroll please, a critical race theory framework. There is it in fucking black and white. They themselves have done my job for me. So I no longer have to tell everyone repeatedly that anti-racism means critical race theory. They're saying it themselves now because they're bold and fucking brave. I suppose I would be too.
So I don't know how loud that was. It was only the last like 30 seconds or so that I had to turn my volume up on my laptop, but it quite clearly stated there a critical race theory framework, right? This is under the curriculum reform subgroup, which was part of a much larger program, which is still ongoing, called curriculum, what's it called? Anti-Racism and Scottish Education Program, which I'll come on to as well, because there's references to that and some of the stuff that I've got open. So, wee bit quieter but audible. Yeah, I as I say, I did turn it up towards the end, but nonetheless, it said it there in black and white. You know, it's not even like I had to do a deep dive. That was just me going through their resources on their own on the Scottish Government's website, right? So obviously the three main protagonists of this sort of venture was Melina Valdeneri, we had Kajida Mohammed, and we had Nizut Utamani. Together, the three of them sort of created this program, which I'm going to share my screen again just now, just for people to get a sort of recap as to this program. So, it's building racial literacy, okay, courtesy of Education Scotland. So it says here that the National Building Racial Literacy Program promotes anti-racism. They always hide behind anti-racism as a baseline professional value, empowering educators to identify and implement anti-racist behaviors, right, and processes in their everyday practice, with the ultimate goal of the Building Racial Literacy Program being to make every educator in Scotland racially literate, effective at dealing with racism, and confident in leading anti-racism. Now, even that paragraph there highlights a myriad of different issues, such as the fact that they are hiding their true goals, their true aims behind their little fluffy term of anti-racist, but more so to the point about racial literacy in and of itself, as well as racism. In order to be anti-racist, surely you'd have to oppose racism. Well, what does racism mean according to these individuals? Well, they tell you themselves. They tell you themselves on their old website before they created the Building Racial Literacy Program, which is a Scottish government funded program, aka UK taxpayer funded program. So they are funding this program at your expense. Their old website was called the Anti-Racist Educator. It's more or less a website that still remains. You can find this to this day, but it is on a website that, unless they've started very recently updating again, it was a website that's remained dormant for some years. That said, there's enough on this website for you to be able to sort of conclude what these people are all about. And that was well before the video that I played just prior, where they speak specifically about critical race theory on the Scottish Government's website. Let's look at how they define racism. Racism is such a challenging concept, right? But let's just get past the la-di-da nonsense and look to how they've got multiple definitions of racism. Interpersonal racism, right, which is prejudice and discriminatory behaviors where one group makes assumptions about the abilities, motives, and intents of other groups based on race. Internalized racism, when members of stigmatized groups are bombarded with negative messages about their own abilities and intrinsic worth. Institutional racism, when organizations, businesses, or institutions like schools and police departments discriminate either deliberately or indirectly against certain groups of people to limit their rights. Okay? Doesn't stop there. Systemic racism, a web of economic, political, social, and cultural structures, actions, and beliefs that systematize an unequal distribution of privilege, resources, safety, and power. Always the emphasis on power, because realistically, that's what a lot of this really boils down to. These people are after power. Theological racism is a racism that uses religion to justify an equal distribution of power, right? This can be seen when colonizers such as Christopher Columbus used Christianity as an excuse to exploit indigenous people and their land. Scientific racism, also known as biological racism or race science, with this type of racism being pseudoscience or eugenics to justify the unequal distribution of power. Always power. This can be seen when the English scholar Francis Galton, Darwin's cousin, coined the term eugenics to describe the betterment of the human race by selectively breeding the best kind of people, aka that they put in brackets here, white, rich, and able-bodied people. Cultural racism is a racism that uses cultural differences to justify the unequal distribution of power. This can be seen with the idea that some cultures, especially white Western culture, as a result of colonialism, are deemed more sophisticated and advanced, while other cultures are deemed to be primitive, backward, and uncivilized. Right? Racial capitalism, in which is a way in which capitalism relies upon the elaboration, reproduction, and exploitation of notions of racial differences. Capitalism is one thing that they attack quite frequently. All right, go figure. Environmental racism, the environmental injustice that occurs along the lines of racial differences, both in policy and practice. In other words, the destruction of land with the adverse effects on health and livelihoods targeted primarily Black, Indigenous, and people of color and poorer people, which of course could include white people, but that kind of defunks the narrative. So were they environmentally racist against their own, these evil white men? Are they environmentally racist against their own kind? No. The reality of the matter is that, like many of the other things that they have listed off there, these are applicable to many white people just the same way as they are for everybody else, such as capitalism and whatnot. But it's always the poor babes until it's not, right? Coloniality is the long-standing patterns of power, again, that continue to occur following colonialism. And then it even goes on to say down here that, look at this shit. Racism and equals race, prejudice, and social and institutional power. Racism is a system of advantage based on race. Racism is a system of oppression based on race. Racism is a white supremacy system. Just to go back and look at what else they speak about on this website. Now, let me emphasize again that the people behind this website are the very same people who are sort of surrounded themselves with this building racial literacy program and or are part of the panels and the groups which are there in place to reform Scottish academia, aka through their critical race theory framework. We've got whiteness, right? We've got white fragility. They even speak about critical race theory. We've got white supremacy, of course. We've got racial literacy. What is racial literacy? Well, given the fact that this is the building racial literacy program, let's see how they talk about racial literacy. Racial literacy, also known as racial consciousness, refers to an individual's deeper awareness and understanding of race. With racial literacy comes the tools and vocabulary to discuss more complex ideas about race and a growing understanding of how racism operates in its multiple forms. It's a very telling paragraph. Very, very telling paragraph. Because they've redefined racism. They've got multiple definitions for racism. And in order for you to understand and thus live your life accordingly by their new metrics, you need to become racially literate. We need a growing understanding of how racism operates. Define racism. Well, they've redefined racism. This is the point. When they speak about white fragility, white supremacy, all these different systemic barriers and institutional racism and environmental racism, etc., etc., etc. The point is, though, these are just ideological concepts that these people have created. That's all this is. A growing understanding, aka until you adopt the critical race theorist mindset, you are racially illiterate. You're thick, you're uneducated. They're going to provide you with the tools and the vocabulary to discuss more complex ideas about race. What do you mean more complex ideas about race? No, it's you people complicating something that's very simple, in all honesty. And then they say here that racial illiteracy, aka racial unconsciousness, is very common in the West, where people are taught from a very young age that everybody is equal. Race does not matter. And if everybody adopts a colorblind lens, and then they put in brackets, stop seeing race, then racism will disappear. Racial illiteracy is hugely problematic as we begin to realize the disastrous impacts of implicit, unintentional, in brackets, racism and institutional racism propagated by the state and those with most power. Oh, power again. Isn't that interesting that colorblind societies, the concept of the idea of being colorblind in any capacity is deemed as problematic? Very, very, very telling, in all honesty. So this brings us obviously back to the racial literacy program, because this is their new concept, or their new program, I should say. And it's just interesting the more you come down, because it says here that it's been co-constructed with a wide range of partners, including education practitioners and stakeholders in the Scottish Government's anti-racism in education programme, with over 300 educators and education system leaders across Scotland having taken part in the programmes thus far during its 3 iterations from 2022. As we speak, there is a 4th, as they call them, cohort. Pretty sure now you can't apply. But effectively what it boils down to is people apply to be part of this program, and then they pick a select amount of people who've applied. Then you have to kind of jump through hoops to prove who you really are. And when you've proven who you really are, you then take part in this program. And then all the resources and materials are sort of shared amongst the group and whatnot. Nobody has access to these materials, bar people that are part of the program. But a common pattern emerges from each and every single one of these people who've participated in this program, and that is that they in turn they create an anti-racist school club in their primary schools or high schools, whatever. They in turn start to modify their workload in terms of how they address certain issues in their classrooms. Effectively, they take all the critical race theorist literature that they've learned via this program, or the resources that they've now got access to, and they start to then in turn promote this cancer to children, all at the taxpayer's expense. I mean, that's just, it's sort of condensed and summarized in some capacity, but this has been going on for a few years now. Which leads me to some of the newer things that they've been doing. Just before I do that, though, I kind of want to show you this as well on this website. Does it show you the funding and costs? Here we go. As the professional learning and leadership team is currently funded to develop a suite of programs, the Building Racial Literacy program is also funded by the Scottish Government's anti-racism and education program. Yes. Just in case anybody wasn't really aware of what the fuck was going on here. Yeah. So that kind of leads me to what they've been up to in recent times. So they won an award recently, which I don't have the links open for, but yeah, the program won an award. But this is probably the first one I'll go to, but I'll have a wee look at the comments before I continue, because this is quite savage, in all honesty. Where are we? So, Ragnar, good to see you, bud. It's quite funny that we Alba video that I made the other day. If you look at your comment, Rugs, somebody replied to it calling how I sort of concluded that video was disgraceful. Yeah, absolutely disgraceful. How dare I conclude a compilation of World War II footage and modern day bagpipe footage to that of people celebrating with LGBT flags. The point really being in said video that, this is our history. We're proud of said history, but at the same time, what did these men really die for? But hey, it's not to everybody's taste, I know. Who else have we got in the chat? Anglo-Saxon. Don't know if I addressed you earlier on. Hello. The Woodlander. Nice to see you, bud. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe there was a comment further up. Somebody that you're referring to. Surely it's not the person that I'm speaking about, or one off the few that I'm speaking about. Or maybe it is, but yeah. They always, it's remarkable to me that we've been sort of accustomed and groomed over the years, generationally speaking, to become colorblind, to not see color, and now we're being berated for it. It's like, okay, well, you just can't fucking win, really. But anyway, who else have we got? Cyborg, nice to see you, bud. And yeah, I think that's it. Hightower as well, who I don't think I've seen you before, but nice to see you. Right, so yeah, this here, this is what they're up to now. So this is on a website called Glow Scotland. I'm going to actually post that in the chat right now, because this is a website people should probably pay some attention to if they don't already. But it's, yeah, there you go. But where are we? So it says, emerging from the anti-racism and education program. I might actually just show that on a different tab later on, but these anti-racist curriculum principles have been designed to support educators, leaders, and learners. Have been designed to support educators, leaders, and learners understand what an anti-racist curriculum can mean in practice. The anti-racist curriculum principles can be downloaded, which I'm about to show you. The principles can be used to support professional learning, dialogue, and reflection for staff and self-evaluation. They promote the co-design of an anti-racist curriculum with learners. Okay, so I'm going to download this in English just to show you. Okay, bear in mind, as I said, Scottish government funded, right? Scottish government funded. Emerging from, I think I've read that. Right, so here's their principles. Our children and young people will experience a curriculum that meaningfully recognises and fairly represents the rich and diverse communities in Scotland and beyond. We'll understand and inquire into Scotland's role in historical world events, including transatlantic slavery and colonial histories, and their continuing impact today. We'll learn about and investigate past and present events in a way that amplifies underrepresented perspectives and stories. Will feel safe and confident to co-design their curriculum from their personal perspectives of those of the wider world. Will be critical thinking global citizens that challenge discrimination and prejudice through an understanding and awareness of the behaviours, practices, and processes that create injustice in the world. We'll learn the difference between individual and systemic racism, their impacts and how they intersect or connect with other types of injustice. We'll be supported to reflect on positionality, privilege and power again, and to unlearn bias, prejudice, and divisiveness. We'll learn that everyone has a right to be safeguarded from racism, define it, or redefine it in your case, and discrimination, and will be empowered to challenge any infringement of this right, to be empowered to bring about new ways of being together in the world by valuing and promoting empathy, something you can't teach. I've said this so many times before, and it's not even a shocking or groundbreaking quote-unquote hot take. If empathy could be taught, then psychopaths and sociopaths would not exist. Effectively, what they mean when they are promoting empathy, or the concept of empathy, or just the word in general, is that they wish to sort of present narratives skewed in a certain way to make you feel sorry for BAMEs. Not enough black teachers in Scotland, that's racism. Feel empathy for the BAMEs. Right? Solidarity and shared humanity that is often disrupted by systemic racism. Okay? And then they've got principles as well for teachers. But before I even go through that as well, because there's only 2 pages here, but this is for children. Our children and young people, right? When they talk about the transatlantic enslavement and colonial histories, right? They're not going to put slavery into context. Of course they're not. No, they want to present it in a skewed manner, aka to generate empathy, quote unquote. They don't want to speak about slavery in its entirety. No, they want to speak a specific form of slavery, right? Again, to instill the notion of empathy. If children were taught about the whites that were enslaved back in those times, if the children were taught about the Arab slave trades, Barbary, etc., then it would put things into context, and it would sort of delegitimize the notion that blacks are inherently oppressed and whatnot. As sad as slavery is in any capacity, irrespective of who's doing the enslavement, the facts remain the same. It wasn't just black people enslaved by evil white men. But we can't be talking about that, because if we put that into context, it derails what they're trying to do here, which is take power. in some capacity. You know? And to talk about critical thinking is just absolutely laughable, in all honesty. But then they speak about global citizenship. This nonsense, this absolute nonsense, does not get the attention that it so deserves, really, because of all that it entails. It's not just a fluffy word, nor is it just a fluffy subject name. All the things that those two words alone entail are some of the most. You've no idea. If you don't have a clue, then you really have no idea how bad things are getting. Let me just say that much. If I've got time, or if I remember, I might even come to it. But again, as I said, racism, privilege, power, etc. These are things they wish to teach to children, not just young people. So for the educators and leaders, they want educators and leaders to commit to continual personal and professional learning to develop a high level of racial literacy. They wish teachers to investigate and actively challenge all manifestations of racism in everyday behaviors, resources, attitudes, practices, and processes. They wish teachers to reflect upon their assumptions and biases, their racial and social identities and those of others, and consider the impact those have on their professional practice. They wish teachers to feel confident in teaching an anti-racist curriculum, which is critical race theory, dressed up nice and neat and pretty as anti-racism. They wish teachers to co-design and enact a curriculum that takes learners' lives and experiences as a starting point and actively source and introduce a diversity of perspectives, texts, and identities and voices. They wish teachers to foster an anti-racist culture where racism can be discussed openly, honestly, and with humility, and with a willingness to take risks and make mistakes. They wish teachers to demonstrate personal and collective leadership across the education system, both in actively promoting an anti-racist culture, critical race theory, and in supporting people who experience racism, define it or redefine it. They wish teachers to safeguard against racism and discrimination, understanding those as a source of serious harm for learners, colleagues, families, careers, and wider community members. Racism, to define it or redefine it, will be understood in the context of the getting it right for every child well-being indicators, children's rights, and human rights, of course. So a lot of demands, a lot of principles, but the takeaway from all of this, of course, is that as this so-called anti-racist curriculum expands in nature, weasels its way into more and more schools up and down the country, so too with it comes their new and improved principles. You know, as I said, targeting young children as well as young people in general. They speak openly about being in nurseries all the way up to the university settings, but the vast majority of the people that are participating in this program are anonymous. Nobody knows who they are. It's just a very select few have either A, stupidly put their head above the parapet, or two, have just done so because they know that they can. You know? So there's that. That leads me to one of those people in particular, Nazoot Amani, who calls herself a Scouser, which is kind of funny, in all honesty. But the Herald seems to be doing quite a few bits of promotion for them, actually, because upon getting the tabs gathered up for this stream, I came across just a month ago. Here she is again. Fundamental mind shifts in diversity in Scottish schools. But it's funny what she says, just a wee bit down here. I don't know if Toffee's watching it or not. Where does she say that? My baby ultimately is global citizenship. Oh, fuck's sake. No, there was a bit where she says that she's a Scouser. Oh, there you go. I had my son in a Paisley hospital and a nurse in the morning. She was supposed to be asking me about breakfast or something. I can't remember what the conversation was. And then she said, "Oh, your English is really good." And for a split second, I was slightly confused. And then I said to her, "I know, I'm a Scouser." Oh, yeah, of course you are. Of course you might have been born in England, but, you know, you've got Indian parents, therefore. You know. Anyway, that's here nor there. Let's get to this one. Why anti-racism in education in Scottish schools is not to be feared. So, in case I haven't been making myself absolutely apparent up until now, They are hiding their critical race theorist framework, their literature, their ideology, their talking points, their redefined words, their everything behind this facade of simply being against racism, aka anti-racist. But again, in order to be an anti-racist, you have to be, in opposition to the concept of racism, which in principle might sound fine and dandy. Ask them to define what racism means, and that's where things get complex, right? Because it's not really the dictionary definition of racism that these people are opposed to. No, they just hide behind this facade. And quite frankly, for all their talk, for all their smugness, for all their popularity in terms of the amount of promotion they get via the media and whatnot, they're fucking cowards. Because not one of them at any point in all the months that I have been covering them and whatnot, not one of them have ever come out at any point to admit that they are promoting critical race theory, or at the very bare minimum, have they ever come out to suggest and or allude to the fact that a lot of the stuff that they're trying to promote has its sort of origins in critical race theorist literature. No, it's simply anti-racism. And as a result, the Herald will just happily publicize this article here, and anybody reading it will simply see the term anti-racist and assume that they must be against racism. Not quite. So, what does she have to say? I love this. Is what it starts off as telling us all that she's a primary teacher and lecturer at the University of Stirling, specializing in anti-racism, critical race theory, and global citizenship. She's the founder of Global Citizenship Education in Scotland, serves as the co-chair of the Scottish Government's Diversity in the Teaching Profession and Education Workforce Subgroup, which is the subgroup, as I made reference to at the start of the stream, that said on their website, on the Scottish Government's website even, that they wish to reform Scottish academia using a critical race theory or theorist framework. She's also a board member of the Anti-Racism in Education programme, Scottish Government again. She's also, if I'm not mistaken, she's got a role in EIS, which is like the teaching union in Scotland. She's like a BAME convener or some pish. This week, she sat down with the Herald to discuss her anti-racist work in Scottish schools, ahead of her upcoming Black History Month event on Monday night in Glasgow. Right? Before I get to that as well, actually, I'm going to show you a video of her. I might as well do that. Yeah. Share this tab instead. Yeah, why not? Let's see. This is a few minutes long. See what's what.
Anti-racism is very much an act of solidarity to try and address the inequalities that we've had for many years across our curriculum and the kind of lack of representation, and also addressing stereotypes and tackling any bias. And that, of course, starts within us as educators first.
It's how we build an anti-racist society. I think it's about making sure pupils and teachers and all staff are confident in celebrating diversity, at challenging any false narratives, and also making sure that we have an understanding of our own history and the links between colonialism and racism. The current workforce has 1.8% of minority ethnic background, which is nowhere near what the society represents. So I think it really is everybody's responsibility to make sure that we are challenging that we're looking into why that's the case. And although it is increasing, I think the underrepresentation takes place at all levels. It's people going into to study teaching. It's those who are able to get a full-time job after probation, and through management positions as well.
I have been supported by my work colleagues and allies, and that's been a good thing. But then I feel like, more could be done, by the government to ensure that number increases, and that it's like a targeted support to ensure that, a representation is seen throughout Scotland.
So we really need to try and understand the challenges and the barriers that minority ethnic teachers face. Now, part of that, again, is that aspect of building racial literacy amongst our colleagues to understand the prejudice and the racism often experienced by our minority ethnic teachers, and the lack of support they feel they therefore have because there aren't other people with the same lived experience that they can share their concerns with. And as a result of that, we are losing teachers throughout different stages of their career. And that's not going to help us then to build that representation or that anti-racist whole school approach that we're looking for. It's been recognised that the lack of a diverse workforce is a challenge for the existing staff members, the recruitment of new diverse students that we want to come into teaching, but also to support our diverse communities. So the EIS has been an instrumental partner in the Race Equality Programme on behalf of Scottish Government as well, leading a lot of the conversations. As part of that work, EIS have conducted research around the approaches that local authorities are taking with regards to recruiting a more diverse workforce, and that's work that is continuing at
just kind of gives you a wee bit of insight as to the sort of dribble you can expect to find if you ever did a sort of deep dive into some of the nonsense that they're sort of perpetuating and whatnot. But again, even underrepresentation and whatnot, this is a common theme from a lot of them. They seem to have this absolute issue with a lack of teachers in Scotland being BAME. And as a result, they use the sort of critical race theorist talking points to insist or insinuate that the reasoning for this is institutional racism, barriers, etc., completely neglecting the sort of demography statistics of Scotland at present, you know. It's like if it's 96 or was 96% white, naturally goes without saying that 4% is not white. Therefore, the amount of teachers you would expect to see in Scottish school settings, majority, if not all of them, will be white. Even less so, will be BAME. And out of the very few or up and down the country that are head teachers, you would assume most, if not all, would be white. You very rarely would see one that's not white, you know, because of the demography. But no, it's racism. This is what we're dealing with here. So anyway, let's get back to this website, this article even, because as I say, she seems to be getting a lot of promotion as of late. But I still stand by my comment. I believe she's a coward. I do believe she's a coward because, you know, just own the sort of ideology that you're sort of promoting, but they won't. They hide behind this facade. So, the term anti-racism has triggered confusion and controversy in recent years. And as someone who has worked across the sector and in advisory roles with the government, how did she get onto advisory roles with the government to begin with? This white supremacist government has allowed a woman of color, a woman who has vehemently, you know, diametrically opposed views to that of the white supremacists. They've allowed her on panels to reform our curriculum. Right then. She says here, though, to this, that could you explain what anti-racist education means to you? And she says here that she would say the confusion stems from the idea that being anti-racist somehow means being anti-white. It absolutely does mean being anti-white. Absolutely does mean being anti-white, because the whole of their ideology is predicated on not just critical race theory, but the baseline for it is whiteness. Whiteness theory. In fact, it's even on their website, whiteness theory, the anti-racist educator that I showed earlier. They are obsessed with these concepts. And they believe that whiteness as a term was created and it has an ideology behind it. That's the basis for Western culture and Western society in general, is whiteness. They believe that white people created the concept of race in order to treat others as subordinate if they weren't white. And as a result, every institution and every structure is built on the back of the ideology of whiteness. So when they're attacking racism or they're being anti-racist, what they're really doing is attacking whiteness. Therefore, by extension, to put it simplistically, they have to be in some capacity anti-white. But even taking the sort of sophisticated deep dive definitions out of the equation, just listen to the rhetoric. They have problems with Eurocentrism in Scotland. In fact, that's even in this article, I'm pretty sure, the mention of Eurocentrism. They have a problem with institutions in Scotland being predominantly, if not completely, made up of white people. Right? Then you've got your terms such as white privilege, white fragility, white supremacy, etc. They're not sitting down little Abdul to tell Abdul about his brown supremacy. No, we're not doing that. We're not berating Abdul's history. We're berating Scottish history. If we're not rewording it and, completely revising it. But anyway, this is what she says, though. But in simple terms, being anti-racist means that you do something or behave in a way which your actions are standing against racism, and it's about standing against racism in all its forms. But again, they've redefined racism. This sounds great, pat yourself in the back, but again, they've redefined racism. It's got multiple definitions now. We've always heard since we were young that racism is bad and it's unkind and things like that. Yes, and then you took that word and redefined it. But see, I rest my case. But it's not made enough difference to focus on that aspect. What we really need is to talk about the institutional aspect of racism. So again, right off the bat, you're redefining racism now in order to suit your narrative, in order to achieve your aims and your goals and your aspirations as a political non-entity. You indeed have to redefine words. Sort of bend and contort reality. That means teaching how institutions, organizations, and society in general are allowed to uphold racist practices. Right. Okay. Right. Okay. Yep. That's fine. Anyway, so what does anti-racism look like in the classroom? I think this is more important. Or wait, no. Most people are happy to say they aren't racist, but are hesitant to adopt the tag of anti-racist. Where do you think that resistance comes from? She responds apparently and says that the term anti-racist has become politicized in the same way that Black Lives Matter has become politicized, but the basic meaning is ultimately around fairness and equality for all people. I say that anti-racism means that you need to take action, but that does not necessarily mean that you need to go out onto the streets with placards. People shouldn't be afraid. It's not some kind of political movement that I'm trying to promote. I'm trying to promote awareness and understanding of what is an issue that has gone on for far too long in our society. What does anti-racism, this is more important though, in all honesty, and here's the mention of Eurocentrism. Since 2001, the Scottish government has invested in the anti-racism and education programme, and all the main stakeholders and key players within our education system are involved. Membership includes representatives from Education Scotland, the Scottish Government, the Scottish Qualifications Authority, and the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities. All of this has been going on since the George Floyd BS, more or less. They say as much on their own website. In fact, the other tab that I opened up about anti-racism, does it say that there specifically, or would I have to go hunting for it? No, there's it right here. Share this tab instead. Anti-racism and education programme. Scottish Government's own website, where they say pretty early on, 3 sentences or paragraphs down, even mini paragraphs, this programme was formerly known as the Race Equality and Anti-Racism and Education Programme. The Scottish Government's anti-racism and education programme was established in response to the significant amount of correspondence received by the Deputy First Minister as part of the Black Lives Matter movement, and one of the recommendations made by the COVID-19 ethnicity expert group seeking to include the teaching of Black history in the curriculum. Yes, that's right, you heard that here first, if you've not heard it before, folks, that the COVID-19 ethnicity expert group promoted or recommended to the Scottish Government that Black history be included in the curriculum. A group that was set up to apparently diagnose and find solutions to the problem of brown and Black people dying disproportionately from quote-unquote COVID, culminated in a recommendation to include Black history in the curriculum. Talk about priorities, or is it opportunism? I don't know. I will let you be the judge. And then it says just here, though, that at the end of 2020, officials in the Learning Directorate, Education Scotland, and the Equality Unit undertook a series of engagement sessions with education and race equality stakeholders to gain a better understanding of what the challenges are in the terms of race inequality and racism in schools. Right. So Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, and whatnot. So that's why we have this nonsense now, more or less. So back to this. One of the program's work streams is looking at changes to our curriculum. Part of that is the idea of decolonizing, right? This means finding ways to move away from what has traditionally been a very Eurocentric view in the stories that we've promoted and the examples of role models that we've used in Scotland. You know, this is what they do. They sort of diagnose problems that aren't actually problems. You would expect in a British context for the vast majority of educational resources, films, adverts, etc., to be predominantly, if not exclusively, Eurocentric in nature because we're a white country. Always have been. The same way that you would expect to find similar things in other parts of the world showcasing or reflecting the demography of said country. But they've taken this term of Eurocentric view and they've diagnosed an issue that's not an issue, and they've found the faults with the issue. They say that everything is Eurocentric because of racism, etc., and discrimination. No, it's not. So just to put this into sort of layman's terms, a brown woman is complaining that the vast majority of educational resources in Scottish schools are white. What the fuck? Oh, but it's taken seriously. We're supposed to take this seriously. We're supposed to take their diagnosis seriously in order for their solutions to be taken seriously. But it's their solutions that are really the issue here. And I'm not just reacting to some stupid article in the Herald for the sake of it. You know, those days are long gone. I don't really give a fuck about doing stuff like that normally. The point is, though, that women like her, and it's not just limited to women. I mean, there's a clip on my channel from my Building Racial Literacy playlist where a man claims contour lines are racist. Contour lines. Yes. And he's part of this program too. But the point is, though, that these people have unfiltered, almost completely and utterly unfiltered access to schools, as well as sitting on government panels with the sole aim of reforming our education system right under the noses of the vast majority of people in this country. And even if people do pay any attention, they seem to be fobbed off by their concepts, such as anti-racism. This evil woman is one of many promoting critical race theory, and yet she's applauded for it. At no stage are we saying scrap this topic or burn this book. It's about encouraging our educators to try and include more diverse perspectives. Why? Why do we need more diverse perspectives in Scotland? Well, because Scotland's becoming more diverse. That's why. And until such a time as more diverse perspectives are included, then it quite clearly indicates racism in some capacity. One of the many forms that it may take. So then it says, what do you think it's important? Why do you think, it's important to expose students to anti-racist values and lessons? She says that by the time you're older, you've already been fed so many ways of thinking, but children inherently understand fairness, especially within their primary sector. We are always promoting messages of tolerance and respect. Anti-racist education is about giving them a wider context to be able to apply those values. So just kind of scratch beneath the surface here, and what we're getting here is children are more malleable. Children are more easily manipulated. Therefore, we can we have more of an opportunity being able to promote our views to children. It's grooming. Same way that it applies to the climate nonsense, the same way that it applies to global citizenship, learning for sustainability, gender BS, LGBT, etc. The same thing is applicable here. We're politicizing children because children are a lot easier to manipulate. That's what's happening here. In fact, some of the resources, they go on to speak about how by the age of 4, it's estimated that children have some form of racial bias, which is their new term for in-group preference. They wish to sort of ensure that that doesn't continue. Why? Because it's racist, apparently. It's also... Some critics might push back by saying that anti-racist education is just another viewpoint that children are being fed. How would you respond to that? And she says, in a way, we are trying to influence how they think. In a way, we are trying to influence how they think. Don't beat around the bush, like. As a teacher, my job is not to tell you what to think. My job is to teach you how to think. But they're still trying to influence how you think. That includes how to be critical. No critical thought in this at all whatsoever, though. But that doesn't mean always criticizing. It means your ability to be curious. And she uses some example of British Indian Army and the Commonwealth countries to help win the war, right? And why they're not really included in World War II history and whatnot. Valid point, I suppose, in many respects, but it doesn't indicate anything other than the fact they're just not really included. It doesn't mean fuck all. And we're not really getting into that. I wanted to get to this part here. Only 1.8% of the entire education workforce is made up of non-white workers in Scotland. We have less than 10 head teachers across the whole country who are not white. Now, how did those less than 10 head teachers get to their positions? If there's things in place to prevent that from happening in its entirety, how did these people get to the positions? But again, more to the point, this is what they do. These people are diagnosing problems that aren't problems and providing reasoning behind these problems. The demography of Scotland, 96, or was in the last census, 96% white. It's estimated that it's gone down by at least 0.5%. We won't really know properly till the next census comes out properly. And even then, the next census isn't really to be taken that seriously anyway, when only 89% of people actually filled it in. And then you have to take into consideration the people that filled it in incorrectly and whatnot. We don't really know. Point is, though, if we even go by the last census, 96% white, therefore 4% not white. So it stands to reason that the vast majority of head teachers, if not all head teachers, will be white in a country that's 96% white. That's not good enough. It's not good enough. It's not acceptable. And then they home in on this and they try to provide reasoning for why this is the case. She then says that we need more diverse staff. Why do we need more diverse staff? Why? They never get asked these questions. And you're supposed to just go without saying. Secondly, the staff need to be made aware of the issues. What issues? What issues? Again, a question they never have to answer. She says that I do think that the Scottish Government has been so committed to really helping us, and there's very little pushback on this issue from the top, which is great. But the challenge remains to get the rest of the education workforce to come forward and take an interest. Ideally, I would love for more teachers and more white teachers to come forward and listen to what's happening. And even though I think Scotland is generally more accepting and inclusive, there remains pushback within society, right? In the last couple of years, I've been subject to really bad racist abuse online numerous times. This bit's quite interesting because it sort of ties into things that took place last year. This time last year, it was so bad that we had to get the police involved. But after hours of interviews with police, telling them why each tweet or each video was racist and how it made us feel, it never left the police's desks because it wasn't deemed serious enough. So what she's referring to there is the education conference. I can't remember the name of it that took place last year. If people were following the channel at the time, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where people simply called them out on their rhetoric, which they were quite happily and confidently posting all over their Twitter about how they promoted, or they've got new plans in the works to diversify the teachers in Scotland, the teaching workforce in Scotland. They want to diversify it. And people simply pointed out that 4% of Scotland is BAME. So it stands to reason the vast majority of teachers will be white. And to insinuate that you wish to diversify the teaching workforce in Scotland, you are in turn, by extension, discriminating against Scottish people or Scottish teachers or white teachers. Words to that effect. For their troubles in these tweets and whatnot, simply debunking their rhetoric, which usually goes unchallenged, they were brandished as white supremacists. So much so that the SNP took it upon themselves to speak about it at their conference, where they had the absolute temerity to insinuate that the white supremacist rhetoric that was taking place online and all the hate justifies or explains even why we need more anti-racist education. So people pulling apart anti-racist rhetoric is exactly why we need more anti-racist education, because they're not literate enough, you see. The challenge, and the fact that the police in this day and age in Scotland didn't really take them up on their complaints, kind of goes a long way to show the hyperbole that was on display from them. The challenge means that people are less likely to do this work. We're putting ourselves out there and we want to encourage more people to come forward and help. But people are obviously reluctant, and the abuse makes it personal and clearly has an impact. Well,
you know, don't condone abuse, but at the end of the day, it has to be said that this woman is one of many who is hell-bent on, you know, inserting critical race theory into Scottish schools. So, has to be said. You deserve some of the shit you get, in all honesty. So I'll have a wee look at the chat before I show the last thing, because one of these building racial literacy educators has been so kind as to put out a presentation of, it's a sort of brief summarization of what they're introducing into schools. She doesn't go into the greatest length of detail, purely because, by her own words, she's sort of confined to or constrained by only having half an hour to talk about it. It kind of gives you a bit of insight as to what's going on here. So I will do just that. Where have we got here? Robert Ingram, nice to see you. Toffee. I don't know if you were in earlier on, but the woman I've just been speaking about. Let me show it again, actually, just for you. Share screen. Please tell me you're still watching, because I just want you to see this. I'm a Scouser, right? Yeah. Okay. She doesn't even sound Scouse. That's the best of it. You know, she's complaining that she was in a hospital, and somebody assumed that her English was good. Therefore, by extension, she must be a foreigner. And her response was, "Well, I'm Scouse," which doesn't even sound Scouse. Doesn't have that accent. She does sound foreign, to be honest. I love this. Even this, it says, "You are a primary school teacher," which of course means you need to cover the whole curriculum while also exploring bigger issues and themes such as climate change or social justice. Why are children being introduced to climate change materials or social justice materials? Why is a so-called anti-racist campaigner in a primary school setting? Why is a woman who's hell-bent on diagnosing all of Scotland's ailments as being the result of white supremacy allowed to sit on Scottish government panels to reform our academia? Makes you wonder. It really does make you wonder. And it's pretty infuriating. We've got Anna Amwar, and we've got her too. You know, there's a bit of a pattern here. You know, get yourself sorted in it. But anyway, it's the last. What else? Is there any other tabs? No, so I'll probably just. Oh, yeah, we'll get to this. What this woman's got to say, like picking gas as well. What like streaky bacon? Vid like. Pass Klutwick, you're up there somewhere. Hello. So I'll share my screen again. We'll get to this woman. I was sort of wary about reacting to this video before I've clipped it, purely in case it gets private or whatever. But now, do you know what? It's been too long now. It's been too long, so we'll get to it. Like,
hello. If you're just joining, I'll just give a couple of seconds for people to join. But there's quite a lot to fit into half an hour, so just literally a few seconds, and then we'll start fairly promptly. But I'm really honored to be here speaking to such a massive audience about. So as part of this, just go change to the next slide. Oh, yeah. So just a little bit of background about why I'm speaking to you. I'm a classroom teacher from Scotland, and I've taught that for a long time now. And I took part in a course called the Building Racial Literacy Program, which you'll hear me refer to as the BRL program. And I was a learner on that program, and I loved it so much. It was so inspiring and changing. It was just a wonderful program of teacher education. Inspired me to begin a website called the PART Project, which again I'll talk about later. And then I began working on the program, so I became a facilitator and helping groups and leading discussions for cohorts 2 and 3, which just wrapped up last week. It's gone very fast. And I spoke on the intersectionality panel as part of this. At some point in this, I also began my master's in social justice and community action, and that is at University of Edinburgh. And lots of the projects that I'm really excited about. Just started working with Historic Environment Scotland and other organisations looking at the learning that goes on in their sites, their links with schools, and how can an awareness of colonialism be incorporated into that learning. So that's
interesting. You know, how these people, you know, as I say, they've gone from being very fringe in nature to managing to find themselves in very lucrative positions now, such as what she said there. She's now been invited to start discussing Scottish museums and whatnot. But more to the point of this stupid little slideshow that she begins with, because I could spend all night talking about her odious, her last sentence, sorry, was her last statement. But so it says here that from her experience, she's a classroom teacher in Fife, right? She's a primary school teacher, may I add. Primary school teacher, just in case anybody didn't hear that correctly, which entails, because I don't know which year she teaches, but that's anything from what, 4 or 5 year old to 12. Okay. She took part in the Building Racial Literacy Cohort 1, which was, as I mentioned earlier on, that was the first round of like people being able to apply to participate in this Scottish government funded program. She came out the other side of that, creating her own website. And one of the wee arrows goes on to say that she then became a facilitator for cohorts 2 and 3. And she's attended some Playful Schools conference. Right? She became a facilitator for building racial literacy. So this woman was a random brown teacher in Fife. She then participated in a critical race theory program. And as a result of that, she's now created her own website. She's participating at all these different conferences. And she's now even going a step further by being a facilitator at future cohorts from this Scottish government funded program. Seems to always be growing arms and legs, right? I'm just going to play this back ever so slightly, because I obviously was so rude and interrupted what she had to say about what she's now doing, because I think that really ties in to sort of conclude what I'm saying there about how these people end up in lucrative positions to poison whatever avenue they find themselves in. So I will do that now, about 2 minutes 10.
Other organizations looking at the learning that goes on in their sites, their links with schools, and how can an awareness of colonialism be incorporated into that learning. So that's sites like castles, like Stirling Castle, Edinburgh Castle, all sorts of historical sites, and who had a hand in building them, and where do the resources come from a lot of the time. And now
Who
we're
had a
very
hand in
on to the
building them?
Playful Schools conference.
Where did the resources come from, you know? Okay. Absolutely everything that we ever did was built on the back of slavery and stealing resources. Yeah, of course. So the Industrial Revolution played absolutely no factor whatsoever in a lot of the wealth generated. It all came from stealing fucking diamonds from Indian caves and enslaving black people. Right.
So I can see a lot of comments coming in, which is so exciting right at the beginning. And I promise I will read them all. It's just so much to fit in. But as part of this, I just thought I would just acknowledge my own bias. I'm very aware that this is going out to a worldwide audience. Things that I say might not apply to different contexts. So I am a BAME educator, a woman of color, but I teach in a predominantly white school in Scotland. In a global context, it's fairly resourced. There's children walking about, so apologies can hear that. So it's depending on where you are in the world. Some things you may think actually that applies. Some things you might think no, actually that doesn't so much. But so just a moment to acknowledge that.
It'd be interesting. Do you really think that this sort of way of educating children would be applied or would be applicable or in any capacity in an all-brown school, in an all-brown area of Scotland, like Govan, or not Govan, but parts of Glasgow anyway? Would this be rolled out in African schools? Would this be rolled out anywhere, bar, as that woman on her little slideshow pointed out, predominantly white, aka Scottish? A BAME educator teaching in a predominantly white school in Scotland. Right? The fact that they even have to attribute these labels to themselves really pisses me off. You're a BAME educator, so fucking what? What makes you any different from any non-BAME teacher? Oh, it's the fact you're brown. Kudos to you. They're the ones, funnily enough, playing identity politics. Really synaptic for me there. But again, it ties into the idea that they're all pushing that colorblind societies are problematic. Very ironic, really, that they are the ones that are hell-bent on weaponizing their identities, but they're allowed to do so because they're after power, right? This nimwit might not necessarily be after power per se, but she's participated in a program which is centered around achieving power, right? A predominantly white, the shock, the horror. But again, do you think that this would be applicable in a country that wasn't predominantly white? Do you think this would even be spoken about or required? No, I don't think so. Let me skip this a bit because this bit's just pointless shit. So here's what she says. Some fears and barriers, you know. There's a lot of fears and barriers that have come out of the woodwork since we've tried to introduce critical race theory into children's lives. Yeah.
Something to be mindful and think about, and I'll put this back on at the end as well. So some of the fears and barriers talking around talking about race in a classroom, you know, you've got parental attitudes, and this can be a big spectrum from parents thinking, well, the priority should be literacy and maths, you know, we shouldn't, doesn't need a place in school, to more extreme views maybe. Cultural attitudes in the ethos of the school, and colleagues and staff room and management, and wider community. Politics going on in different countries, fear of language and terminology, as things move rapidly. Think, you know, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to accidentally insult people more. People's own experiences with race. They could have their own trauma, or you know, have that fear that I speak about white fragility later, which is really something interesting to read about. Confidence, comfort zone, fear of being labeled if you're an educated of color, particularly in a white.
She mentioned white fragility. Something that we'll talk about later. White fragility. A primary school teacher. You notice how she didn't really debunk anything that she said so far in terms of parental attitudes, you know? Some people think that there should be more focus on maths and English and whatnot, as opposed to, you know, quote unquote anti-racism. And, you know, she just sort of brushes over that. Yeah, it's a pretty valid argument, to be quite honest. But hey, what do I know? Obviously, I'm just exuding too much white privilege. Or should I say white fragility, something that she's going to speak about later, apparently. But point remains the same. Why is that a concept? Where does that concept derive from? Well, it derives, from critical race theory. So every so often, despite their best attempts, because they're all cowards, to promote a fluffy version of what they're really up to, ever so often, it sneaks out, it spills out, and you get a wee glimpse into what they're really pushing here. Sometimes they're very open about what they're doing in terms of redefining words and whatnot. Other times they try their damnedest to gaslight and strawman, such as this here. Here's another reference to the colorblind society argument in terms of no problem here is a myth of a post-racial society. But no debunking takes place here. No counter-arguments take place here. No. And yes, you could make the argument that she's constrained by time, but there's plenty other presentations that have taken place, some of which I've clipped that are on my channel in the playlist for you to see yourself, where they kind of go over some of these things and they never ever debunk them at all. Never. Anyway.
Trauma, or you know, have that fear that I speak about white fragility later, which is really something interesting to read about. Confidence, comfort zone, fear of being labeled if you're an educator of color, particularly in a white, a predominantly white area. You really have that fear when you discuss race, that everyone's like, oh, here she goes again, or here it goes again, or here they go again, like just talking about race, banging that drum, playing the card. There's a myth of a post-racial society. There's no problem here. There's a black president. We've got an Asian prime minister. We've just got an Asian first minister in Scotland. But it is a myth. and lack of funding.
What is a myth? And I find this funny. What is a myth is that absolute grotesque attempt to gaslight. You very, very, very seldom will hear people saying, well, we're not racist. Barack Obama was black. Well, we're not racist. We have Rishi Sunak. Nobody says this. Barely anybody says this. The only people I ever hear make reference to that apparent statement are the people that are hell-bent on debunking it the second that they state it, such as herself, albeit she didn't do it very well. She just called it a myth. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for that, love. You really helped debunk the myth. But I've heard it so many times before that racism isn't an issue here. I'm not racist, man. And blah, blah, blah. And then they then in turn will say that these sort of comments are, illiterate or it's a myth, etc., etc. No, nobody says this. Nobody says this. But the reality of the matter is that, especially how they're on record, not her in particular, but many of them are on record of saying that they wish to actually target the more predominantly white areas of Scotland. They're actually the areas. In fact, I'm going to get this up. Because, for anybody that's watching this, that's sort of skeptical or whatever the case may be, they might assume that I'm just talking shit. I have all the proof. I've clipped a lot of their crap over the years. And I think this one has to be said, just to sort of hammer home what I'm trying to say here, where they think that white parts or whiter parts of Scotland are actually where we should be focusing our attention on because they're whiter. All right. So let me just get my playlist up, which, as I say, is available on my YouTube. If you go on my Telegram, there's a lot more stuff there. But here we go. This one here. Let me show you this because this is just remarkable, really. My uncle has a black toe. Wow, mate. Yeah, that's good. That's progress, mate. That is progress. Present, share screen. Let me show you the building racial literacy. Right, so here's it here. Kajida Mohammed, who's one of the three main perpetrators of all this BS, and so she, Melina. But here we go.
I'm coming to you next about your thoughts on this issue, and I'm wondering from your experience if the perceptions and the misconceptions look different in different parts of the country as well. I'm thinking about the difference between the kind of urban experience in Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, Aberdeen compared to kind of more rural parts of the country. What are your thoughts around that?
Just unmute myself, Kevin. Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. In fact, while Rowena was speaking, I was thinking about the number of webinars where I've been speaking to head teachers across Scotland. And again, that sort of geographical divide from the urban. And in fact, I was surprised at one session that I was doing, and some of the head teachers said, I asked them, why are you here? Why did you put yourself forward to attend the session? It was called Let's Talk About Race. And they were very honest, Kevin, in their remarks. And the majority of them were saying, we're here for tips. And I actually had to say, talking about racism and equity work knowing some tips aren't going to help much. But they also spoke about the challenges. So maybe that's something to say about their levels of racial literacy. And I know that a lot of the work that Melina and the sort of Building Racial Literacy Design Group have been working on that. But so again, that reminds me of perhaps that lack of language that they have to name and frame the issues if they're just looking for tips. And it's back to that point where Rowena was saying that they're not seeing it from that systemic structural level. It's very much, what am I going to do as an individual? But they also spoke about the fear that they had, Kevin, that they would be willing to have conversations in their school with their leadership team and the wider staff team and the young people for that matter around race. But they were worried about the pushback they would get from their parents. And that was more from the rural schools. So it's almost that almost all white communities thinking this is not something we need to be discussing because we've got no problem here, right? And actually, it's those very communities that really do need to have those conversations. So
tapping and smacking her lips. Yes, I know. I don't know if she's had a stroke or what, but it's very, very difficult to listen to. But, you know, it's very interesting, though, that she speaks about some of these teachers who attend these anti-racist conferences, and they wish to speak about the issues that are apparently issues, but they feel somewhat uneager to do so because of the area that they live in. They don't wish to speak about this in predominantly white areas because in doing so they might get pushback, and as a result, this is the areas we should be focusing on. So effectively what that is let's just say for the Highlands, for example, we really wish to, you know, start implementing critical race theory or even anti-racism in the Highlands. But because there isn't enough brown and black people in the Highlands to justify the talking or the conversations about race and diversity and immigration, we might get pushback. I wonder why. And it kind of leads me back to sort of previous points about like post-racial societies and whatnot, or even a more pressing point, and that is that like the idea of a colorblind society in part has come from years and generational years, when I say years, generationally speaking, of promoting these concepts of diversity and inclusion, etc. But a big part of it as well as that, especially for the more rural areas of the UK, these things never had to be spoken about because it wasn't a fucking issue. You know, especially in rural Scotland, especially away up in the Highlands or even further afield in the islands and whatnot. Why would you need to start teaching little children in Orkney or Shetland or Skye or Inverness about black people and diversity and inclusion, etc., when there's nobody around them? Like, there's no justification for it. None at all. So it does beg the question, isn't it? Is it funny or is it not that these issues seem to follow these people wherever they go? But what do I know? Yes, exactly. So if exactly, racism is such a problem in the Isle of Barra, so we need to teach them critical race theory, right? And then, of course, hypothetically speaking, they pose this this proposal, and as a result, there's parent pushback. That somehow indicates why we need to do more. You know, exactly, Ragnar. It's indoctrination, absolute indoctrination, hiding behind a facade of simply being opposed to racism. But again, let me reiterate: define racism. Well, they've done that time and time and time again. But let me get back to this this nimwit, shall we say? Because, as I say, it's only half an hour long. I'm not even like for the last like 10 minutes or so. She's like addressing shite like in her chat or whatever. So they even need to go over that. It's just kind of her wee slideshow that she has for us all. It would be a racist not to go through it. You know, I'm all about inclusivity here in the Highlands of Scotland. It's what my people are all about.
Time support, you might be working in area of need. Over this conference, there's been lots of conversations about assessment, and you know the demands of assessment can sometimes make the pressure really take away from things that are more human and holistic, and things like empathy and kindness when you've got these targets to be met. So I speak about bias a lot, and bias is that like those preconceived notions in your head, you know, those things that are that are socialized into you. Like, for example, my elderly neighbor one day asking me, how long have I spoken English? And I know that my accent's confusing, but that's that bias because that person had seen so many people move over to the UK. So when we moved in, they assumed must have just moved to the country, despite me having a very British accent.
And this is another example of what they do in terms of diagnosing problems that don't actually exist, while simultaneously, alongside doing so, providing, you know, definitions and reasoning behind it. So this woman has said that her elderly neighbor apparently has bias because she assumed wrongfully that this woman had moved here from another country. Why? Bias, of course. No, and then she also says that a lot of people prior to her moving to become her neighbor had come over from different countries. So she wrongfully assumed that she must be the next in a long line of people that have moved here from other countries. The reality of the matter is that, and as they call it, Eurocentric bias, Britain is whites. Scotland is white. Therefore, when you see somebody that's not white, your first point of thought is going to be that they must be from another country because British people are white. It's pretty simple. Like, it's really that simple. And I feel like I'm wasting fucking time having to debunk waffle like this. But this is what we're dealing with here. Eurocentric bias, right? Some of the examples that she provides here are about skin tones, plaster. She even goes on to talk about Harry Potter and how when they did a version of it in theaters, Hermione was black, and then she has the audacity to turn around and say something to the effect of, well, people were talking about how Hermione was white, but I read the book and it doesn't mention anywhere in the book that Hermione was actually white. I'm pretty sure it actually does. At least one reference to Hermione being white is in the book, but that's here nor there. The point really goes back to what I've said earlier on in this fucking stream, is the fact that skin tones and dolls, etc., being white or shades of white, as opposed to having like black and whatnot. It's Scotland. The same way you would expect to see the same sort of thing in China, for example. Pick any country in the world that you want. It's China is going to have Chinese dolls. China is going to have preferential what's the word I'm looking for? In-group preference. So, like, they're going to be more accepting of people that look similar to them, even if they're not Chinese. You know? Same way black people in Africa, albeit, yeah, there's a lot of tension over there and whatnot. But if a white guy moves over to Africa, instantaneously they're going to know that he's an outsider. Right? Same. She goes on to talk about Ukrainian refugees as well, and then, you know, that compare that to the treatment of Pakistanis, etc., which in and of itself is a whole stream you really could go into, because I have believed for some time that the sort of red carpet treatment that's been rolled out for Ukrainians is going to eventually become applicable to every other refugee under the sun. But the point really remains the same here, though, that people naturally are going to be somewhat more accepting of Ukrainians than they are to people from other parts of the world. Not because they're inherently racist and whatnot, it's because they are, it's an in-group preference, there's familiarity, etc. It's just the reality of the matter. But I'll skip the rest of that because I'm not going to listen to her pish about this. Let me get to, because she talks about this for a bit. And then fucking plasters as well. I mean, come on now. Here we go.
Examples. And there's misconceptions when I talked about anti-racism and race and history of colonialism. And again, that comes back to my context. The UK has a steep history in colonialism. Lots of the time in conversations, it comes up that people feel like I shouldn't be responsible for things my ancestors did. Or when discussing anti-racist teaching, people going, it's just really easy to say the wrong thing. I'd rather just not. And that's race evasive teaching. And that's, you know, it's shortchanging those people's. Or when discussing the concept of white privilege, and if I had more time, I'd unpack white privilege more because it's so interesting and something that really changed my perspective and learning about it. But I would recommend going away and reading about white privilege. But there's that thing of just because I'm white doesn't mean I'm privileged. Should be told I'm privileged. Do you know the experience of people in color does not take away from anyone else's adverse experiences? The whole point is listening and openness and really looking at intersectionality. How, you know, you could talk about an LGBTQ struggle and you can't compare, but then there's intersections. It's so hard to describe, such a big thing to unpack. And I remember when I was doing my undergrad and I was doing a gender studies class, and someone in the class said they didn't identify as a feminist because they thought there were bigger problems in the world like war. It was such a strange answer. And the tutor so brilliantly and so dryly was like, can you not multitask? So yeah, that's a difficult one. The Building Racial Literacy program, and I had more information this initially, but half an hour is not enough time to cut it down. But I do share information more about it at the end. It's a real flagship. It's just been a wonderful, innovative, collaborative, community-based program. And it's a team of professionals, predominantly educators, but you have people who work in social work, police, museums, all sorts. And the aim is to build knowledge and understanding of racial literacy. Professionals can go back to their own communities and share and lead training. examining the curriculum, sharing resources, and having that sense of community to just constantly share things that might help others, and improve working in education for people of colour, making more opportunities for them to be recruited. In Scotland, currently 1.8% of primary and secondary teachers are people of colour, but within primary, that's only 1.2%. And the GTCS got a target of 4% in the next so many years. But
a lot to unpack there, like. Yep. No, you're not wrong. It is. It is. And let me reiterate again, just for anybody that's like come along in the latter half of the stream and whatnot. This bimbo, right? When she talked about white privilege, I thought it was quite funny because if I had more time, I would unpack. Wow, I wish you fucking would. I wish you would. But she said that it was very interesting learning about that because she's just another bimbo who in turn participated in this program, as is on the screen, the Building Racial Literacy program, and then came out the other side, seeing everything that was wrong with the world. All of the discrepancies and anomalies all across Scotland could be explained by critical race theorist literature. You know? Hence why she says there that we need to improve working in education for people of colour and make opportunities for more educators of colour. Then goes on to elaborate by saying that 1.8% currently at present, teachers in Scotland are BAME. And there's a target of 4% for the coming years. Where does that target come from? Well, that is going by the 2011 Scottish census. So 96% white, 4% not white. Therefore, 4% is BAME. Therefore, at least, it's always an emphasis on at least 4% of the teachers in Scotland have to be BAME or should be BAME, right? This is what you call proportionate representation, which is a very, very slippery slope, in all honesty, because as the population increases in diversity levels, so too would all of these institutions. So 20% BAME in population or demography terms, therefore 20% of teachers need to be BAME. What happens when it's 80%? What happens when it's 95%? You see what I'm kind of talking about? I don't know why this is such a taboo subject. I don't understand why these talking points that they come away with are never, ever received with any pushback. There is not a written law. There is nothing out there that speaks of the fact that 4% of teachers in Scotland must be BAME because of because of the census. But again, this is what I'm saying. So this woman would have waddled on into this program and been presented with the statistics of teachers. There would have been a breakdown of the teachers. And the overarching consensus and conclusion of these statistics would have been that 4% of the country is BAME, but 4% of teachers are not BAME. There's a discrepancy there. This is racist. Therefore, we need more to be done. More needs to be done to diversify the teaching workforce in Scotland. Why? Why does that need to be done? Why do we need to have more opportunities to recruit educators of colour? Why? Why? These are questions that aren't really that rhetorical, but they're questions that are never asked regardless. And she does look a wee bit white. Like, I don't know if she's half caste or can I even say that anymore? I don't even know if I can. It's really irrelevant, to be honest, because there is white people doing this too. There is white teachers on this program. Angel Hinckley, a woman I've made videos on in the past, she specifically specializes in teaching autistic children, and she's part of this program. I mean, there is no limits to the absolute horrifying nature of what they're up to. Autistic children being presented with this crap. Well, it's just, and yeah, you're right. There's absolutely an aspect of demoralization. There is, but I do think that there's also there's a serious lack of coverage of this program in particular, but more so the sort of concept itself from much larger platforms than myself. And I've said this before on streams and whatnot. Like, where the fuck is like Sargon, the Lotus Eaters? Why are they not talking about this? mean, they're quite happy to talk about critical race theory in general. We don't hear them talk about this. Count Dankula would be the best guy to go to for this, because he's done videos on critical race theory. This should be right up his alleyway. And I'm very much of the belief that it's just because he's not really aware of it, as opposed to it being anything other than that. I can't do this with my measly little channel. I can't. I've tried. It needs people with much larger followings than myself. But the fact of the matter is, this is happening right now. And every single month, every year, it's growing arms and legs. So, yeah. Anyway, let's get back to this shite.
It's not just about building quotas. Quotas are important, but it's also about educating the people who are involved in the recruitment program, the recruitment process, on their own bias as well, because that kind of makes the change as well, in a more organic way than having quotas, but quotas are also important. So it's a play conference. When I was first asked to speak, I was a bit worried. How does my work relate to play? I worked in the early years. I've worked in the upper years, whatever. So I thought, play and anti-racism, that's an interesting one. And the more I thought about it, the more I was seeing these links. You know, diversity should be normalized into classroom resources and visuals. Children are interacting with the space around them. And if there isn't the right representation, then they're coming up with different, and they're coming to their own conclusions, and then they might not be the most open-minded at once if they're not seeing that spectrum of identities. So they're becoming active agents, then they're engaging in conversations of social justice, even from the lowest level. And that can be teacher initiated or environment initiated, or like just to come out organically. Exploring real world scenarios, exercising judgment. It's a safe space to reflect, to test out opinions, to work through the making sense of the world, and teacher confidence to practice anti-racism affects the way the pupils of color can access learning. So how included do those pupils of color feel? Do they feel represented in their curriculum? Do they feel like they're seen in the classroom?
Oh, right. So, where do we go again? How does play link to anti-racism? There's a few comments there, actually. I should probably address. Where is he? Where did he go? Where did you go? Like, Dank won't touch it because he's once. I'm very, very familiar with that. I'm pretty sure he said that when he was speaking to Vaush or Vosh, whatever he is. But critical race theory is one of those things. It's very similar, in my opinion, to LGBT. You don't need to be far right, quote unquote, to oppose critical race theory. You don't even need to be a civnat to oppose critical race theory, provided you are not a sort of very fucking ardent, militant progressive. Then you should probably have an issue with this. Because again, the second that you sort of scratch beneath the surface of what anti-racism entails, it becomes pretty clear that it's not how it's described. It's not what it says in the tin. Therefore, there really shouldn't be any people out there, such as Dankula, who might very well be against the sort of accusations of him being like a Nazi and whatnot. Like, he should be totally confident to talk about this, and he has talked about critical race theory in the past. He has. Same with like Sargon and whatnot. So I just don't understand the sort of silence over it, really. Bruce Scott, he's been on my channel, and we've done a stream with Scott Sarmer before. He's spoken about it. He's even said himself that a lot of the stuff that I initially was putting out, when it was a lot easier to access the information on it, before they all start fucking blocking me on Twitter and whatnot, a lot of the stuff that I was putting out helped him to sort of run with it himself, and he's done so. David Clues has spoken about it from UNN, but it's just not good enough. Purely on the basis that there's a deafening silence. And I don't think this is a left or a right issue, really. I don't think this is like the big bad Nazis versus the rest of the world on this issue. Because you could even realistically be a black parent and have a problem with critical race theory, because critical race theory centers itself in an educational context. It centers itself around
continuously insinuating that all children who are not white are eternally victimized and all white children are going to grow up to be oppressors and the system privileges them because they're white. So effectively, anybody could really have an issue with this. And to be honest, there is quite a lot of people have an issue with this. But all I'm saying is that this building racial literacy program really does lack the attention it clearly deserves. Because as the stream has gone on, cautious of time, I know this, but the Herald, just a limp-wristed paper in the UK or Scotland anyway, quite happy to interview these people. These people are on Scottish government panels, etc. You know, how did we get here? We got here because there's literally no attention nor eyes on them. And the one time that there ever was eyes on them last year, when people started to call them out on Twitter due to the fact that they were hell-bent on bamming up, promoting and celebrating their new PDFs and Padlets to diversify the teaching workforce, they sort of smeared every single person who had the temerity to call them out and debunk their BS as being white supremacists and hate-filled bigots, etc., etc. I just think more attention needs to be on it, really. So, yeah, and Billy Bloggs said that... No, wait, that wasn't that one. It was further up, sorry. Well, you know, you wouldn't be the first person that's pestered. Maybe not necessarily Sargon or that, but I know people have pestered. Well, Clive has had some sort of exchanges with Daniel in the past about this, but maybe not enough information was sort of provided at the time. I don't know. Just find it very odd, to be honest. It's one of those things. But there we go. So anyway, back to the presentation. But diversity normalized into classroom resources. You know? Let me see if I can get this quickly. What do we mean by race and racism? No. We need to... This is back on... I'll find it, like... A curriculum... Here we go. This is back on... This is the website I posted in the description at the very start of the stream. Right? So this website's pretty much just another one of these critical race theorist websites, filled to the brim of cancer. Very interesting quote here, though. A curriculum which reflects diversity. And it says that it's important that all children and young people are represented, see themselves in the curriculum and recognize it as relevant to them. Right? But then it says, until society represents everyone, the question will always be, where do I belong? Do I belong? Representation is vital because it provides the opportunity for your existence to be acknowledged in the world, right? So this is from some women doing a TED Talk. But again, this is another one of those things where they point to anomalies or problems and then they diagnose said problem and then they simultaneously will provide solutions to rectify the problem. This problem in particular being that brown and black children in Scotland, or just brown and black people in general in Scotland, don't feel quote-unquote represented. They don't see themselves. Everybody around them is white. But the issue here is that that's not a fucking issue. It should go without saying because Scotland is white. Right? So what they're doing here is sort of a two-pronged attack because of what it says further on down this article here. And it's also sort of showcasing every single facet of their educational resources, is that they are sort of exploiting the sort of inferiority or outsider complex that like non-white children might have in Scotland, right? They're exploiting that. They feel like outsiders, and that needs to change, you know. Society's too ethnocentric. It's white supremacist in nature. It deliberately excludes. No, it's nothing to do with any of that BS. Your prognoses are all wrong and incorrect. It's Scotland. It goes without saying. That should be the retort. But we've sort of surpassed that now. And now this is why we're hearing more and more often that we need to normalize diversity. Because in doing so, little Tyrone won't feel like an outsider. And it's wrong to not have diversity normalized. As it says here that normalizing diversity within the curriculum as opposed to normalizing the white majority ethnic group gives every learner the important message of being valued and belonging. And so until such a time as diversity is promoted and is normalized, then there will be a lack of feeling of being valued and belonging. But more to that point as well that I've highlighted, where is there at any point ever been in a Scottish or anywhere else for that matter,
a normalization process of a white majority. It's always gone without saying. But this is what I'm saying. They are pointing to problems that don't exist, diagnosing them, etc., etc. So it goes without saying that Scotland's white. Goes without saying that Scotland's always been white. Goes without saying that Scottish institutions will be white or predominantly white because Scotland is white. That isn't because of common sense and historical accuracy and whatnot. No, it's because of a normalization process that must be challenged and countered. Because until such a time as it is challenged and countered, then BAME children and BAME people will not be represented, nor will they feel valued, nor will they feel like they belong. The issue is not on Scottish society for any insecurities that an immigrant child may or may not have. The onus is on the parents for bringing a child here or having a child here, right? You moved to a white country. What the fuck did you expect? But anyway, back to this woman who goes on to say that people's becoming active agents in conversations about social justice. It's just relentless. Why are children being taught about social justice?
So it's good to have an educator that's got an awareness of some of the issues faced. Just a couple of practical examples. So from the lower years, you're looking at making sure that range of books. I'm at the International School of Building, and I'm just blown away by how many books they have. It's just so beautiful, just incredible resourcing. And I'll talk about books again later and what we did in our library, but just making sure that they're seeing different, some that are specific to cultural, so like holidays or celebrations, but then some that just normalize it. And there's loads of examples, and I share them on the website. Access to appropriate news stories, use of videos and RME. I put cultural holidays at the end, but I'm just going to mention it here because the next thing I'm going to say is avoiding stereotypes. Yeah, it'd be great to talk about things like, well, yeah, you should be talking about Eid right now. It's Ramadan, and how are these, are we celebrating these things? But that shouldn't be only what the children are seeing, because then that's when you have things like the neighbor asking me how I was looking English. Like, that's when you have those things where you see someone and you assume they must be of a certain religion because that's the only reference point people have. So making sure they bought my class of football match just now, and we've had.
So I'm obviously very cautious at the time now, because I don't really want to go past the 2 hour mark, but she does waffle a lot. I can't really chastise her for that because I've waffled for almost 2 hours, but the PowerPoint slide, shall we say, that came on prior to this was the lower years. So primary school kids again. This is the upper years, obviously. And the usual pish, diverse range of books, that'll change the world. Regularly watching news round. Okay. But more importantly, though, it's further down it says history lessons, and then in honest history. Look at the photos on the right hand side. I don't know how clear that is because obviously it's StreamYard and whatnot, but there's 2 black women in kilts, or very, very old fashioned attire, right? But anyway, it says that this is honest history, mind, but it says Black Lives Matter social studies. Yeah. Because there's so much honest historical talking points that come from those that support all things Black Lives Matter, surely. Yeah. It's just remarkable. So your stupid nonsense from coloring pencils and diverse range of books all the way to Black Lives Matter / social studies. It's grooming. A whole school approach. She speaks about sort of diversifying library books. Then goes on to talk about staff training, which involves effectively everything that you know as a teacher. You need to put that to one side and open up some critical race theorist textbooks. Parent information. But again, this very important point, this actually, parent information. Because quite often you hear from these people as they try to justify their fucking ever-intensifying intrusion into academic life, they sort of justify it, in part at least, by saying that the parents are on board. Not entirely true, though, is it? Because you're lying. Hence the emphasis on me saying a few times throughout the stream that these people are cowards. They're not being entirely honest about what they're actually doing here. In order to provide parents with adequate information to allow them to decide whether or not this is acceptable in their school, their child's life, you have to lie, admit real justification as to what's going on here. Critical race theory, I don't know, it's just standard racism. You know, it's not, though, is it? They're anti-racism clubs. Yeah, this is a thing. Children of all ages participating in anti-racist school clubs, which again centers around critical race theory. It's just fucking constant. Absolutely is constant. Well, that's too big a paragraph. Fuck that. So then I think she just sort of waffles here, to be honest. Yeah. So I can sort of stop sharing my screen now. Yeah, that's sort of some of the updates that are taking place right now in terms of their they've got a new cohort coming soon. They've won an award for their efforts, and they've now unveiled their so-called anti-racist principles. So it's just sneaking on beneath the surface level. Nobody seems to fathom that it's even a fucking thing, really. It's an interesting point there from Toffee, though. Where did it go? I've seen that. Actually, very, very similar to this, actually, Streaky's comment. They are preparing the children for acceptance of their downfall. And where did it go? Jesus Christ. Fucking hell, there's so many comments. I don't know where your comment is. Yeah, sort of similar to this, because I firmly believe that part of this normalization process, as they're calling it, sort of trying to eradicate the biological concept of in-group preference. They're trying to sort of normalize diversity, normalize immigration to children, so as it continues unabated, there's less pushback. Really does boil down to something as simple as that. On a very young academic level. But in terms of every other aspect of society, the fact that there's always the emphasis on power, lack of representation, etc., there is absolutely a power grab at play here, where they've sort of seen an inlet to attack society to achieve their political goals by insinuating that institutions are racist, barriers are racist, anomalies are racist. As I said, they're diagnosing problems, they're creating problems or pointing to issues, diagnosing them as issues, and then providing reasoning for why they're issues, what led us to this point. And by extension, they then in turn provide solutions. You know, schools are racist. You know, so we need brown and black teachers, and there's not enough brown and black teachers because schools are racist. Yeah, okay, whatever. But again, just sort of let me emphasize here, as I've almost gone on for 2 hours, that everything that I've sort of gone over the night is happening right now. This isn't just limited to university campuses anymore. This is Scottish government funded. This is a program that has, since its inception, materialized more and more as the months have gone on, and is managing to encroach itself into more and more and more facets of academic life for children of all ages. Their goals are pretty simple. They state their goals pretty simply, and I read them out. They wish to see in the future every teacher in Scotland being racially literate. So, where do we go from here? How do we look through my playlist for a go in terms of some of the stuff I've sort of compiled? Well, it's very difficult nowadays to get stuff from these fucking people because they are all sort of hidden behind their sort of private Twitters and whatnot. I used to find a lot of stuff on them. But let me see the maps. Yeah, I found the maps a discriminatory one. Yeah, the guy said contour lines were racist. Fucking, like, what are you on, mate? Jesus Christ. Man, he was like gay as well. It was funny. Let me see what's here. Decolonizing Scottish academia. Decolonizing the curriculum. Schools adopting race literacy. Redefining racism. Scottish government funded. Every educator will be racially literate, aka critical race theorist. The principles of the Building Racial Literacy Program. The White Privilege Walk. You know, there's a lot of stuff that I've clipped, even more so on my channel that's more in like text format. But, you know, I'm just trying to find one to sort of end this. What I think I will do, actually, is this woman here. Where did she go? Listen to how she redefines racism. Yeah, I think we'll go with that.
I guess we've kind of set the scene here of what some of the issues are and some of the kind of concerns that we're trying to address. There's been a huge amount of work done, which was recognised in the follow-up report about trying to close that awareness gap in terms of racial literacy. Do you want to talk a wee bit about some of the work that you've done about anti-racism and building racial literacy across the country?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. And thanks, Angel, for sharing that story. Angel is also a member, a participant on the Building Racial Literacy Program, and we've got a couple already in the audience, so it's great to see so many people engaged. And yeah, I also had the same issue trying to set up an anti-racist club, but with pupils explaining why they thought anti-racist is actually really important and part of our social justice values. It eventually worked, so don't give up on the term anti-racist. So yeah, just to give you a bit of background on what's going in Scotland, the Building Racial Literacy Program is a professional learning program prototype that has been co-constructed with a range of anti-racist organisations, including the Scottish Association for Minority Ethnic Educators, so with Khadija here, and it's part of the wider Scottish Government programme of work looking at race, equality and anti-racism in education. And this first iteration of this prototype programme is really designed to build the racial literacy of educators across Scotland. And what we mean by racial literacy, we're really looking at developing people's understanding of racism. And just to touch on the point about misconceptions about racism, there's still that misconception that racism is really about individual hate and prejudice, and it's usually intentional, and that wider systemic but also endemic nature of racism is misunderstood.
You see her, she's redefining racism there. What she more or less just did there was say that the dictionary definition of racism, no, this is about institutions, etc. Well, we better get a Scottish Government funded programme then in place to indoctrinate all of our youth. Yeah, that's what we need. That's what we fucking need. This woman, by the way, it's funny how, like, she has lambasted absolutely all pushback, as little as it has been in the grand scheme of things. She lambasted everybody as being a white supremacist for having the temerity to call this shit out. We have some four-eyed non-entity who isn't even from Scotland. She's half French, half fucking... I can't even remember what country her father comes from, but she's not Scottish. She's not even British. She moves to Scotland, right? Then decides to take it upon herself to go to university and do social studies or whatever it was. Then in turn went to America to understand and research more critical race theory. Then in turn came back to Scotland to start this fucking program as well as her old website. Like, who are you? Who are you? It's just remarkable. It's just remarkable, really. Now, for all the term that gets thrown about fucking endlessly from people like herself, plenty of people of the same melanin skin tone as myself will throw out the term racist all the time. If anybody has been racist,
If anybody is being racist in the most literal sense, it is these people with their never-ending, scathing attacks on history, institutions, people, purely for being white. Fucking.
There's a misunderstanding that racism is not really an issue in Scotland, it's more an issue in England or in the US, but not really in Scotland. So in this program, we're really trying to raise people's awareness of how racism works in Scotland, uplifting, amplifying those.
See what I'm saying? So give people an understanding of how racism really works. Really? Is that what you're doing now? Because she's a big brain. You know, she is a big brain. She has now fucking embroiled herself with all things critical race theory, and now she knows how our society operates. She knows how our institutions operate. She knows how our minds work. She knows how it all works, and she wishes to, you know, embrace. She wishes to encourage other people to see the world how she sees it, see the truth for what it is, how racism really works. It's just remarkable. It's remarkable, really. It's cancer. That's what it is. It's absolute cancer. And the Scottish government are balls deep in culpability in this, in all honesty. Absolutely. Because it's one of two things. They're absolutely ignorant to what they're funding, or they have they absolutely know what they're funding. It's one of two things, really. Let you be the judge of that one. Let's finish this off with that.
Experiencing of racism in Scottish education, so that educators become aware of how it can operate, even within their classrooms, often unintentionally, because they're unaware. So it's about building their understanding, also building their confidence to practice, and embed anti-racist practice in their behaviours and processes, and build their confidence in racial dialogue. So really building their skills to talk about race with children, with young people, with staff, colleagues, parents and wider communities, because that is such an important skill if we want a fair society for all. And so as part of this prototype program, we wanted to have a range of different perspectives included in the first cohort. So we've had nominations through 27 different Scottish local authorities, so all the way from the Central Belt, down to the Central Belt, and all the way up to Orkney as well. So really diverse perspectives from different participants, and participants from early learning and childcare, community learning and development, primary schools, secondary schools, as well as local authority officers, managers, because that's what the Teaching a Diverse Scotland report identified. If we want to increase representation of Black, Asian, minority ethnic teachers in the Scottish profession, then we also need to make sure that local authority officers improve their understanding of how racism operates.
So in order to improve the diversification process of the Scottish teaching profession, we need to improve people's understanding, the recruiters, their understanding, that type of rhetoric. Basically what that means is that people who are in the positions to recruit new teachers have to become accustomed to the rhetoric from the critical race theorists, aka don't hire whitey. You need to hire BAMEs. You need to understand your unconscious bias and your racism. You know? In order to become anti-racist, you need to hire BAMEs. That's more or less what it boils down to, which sort of goes full circle in the sense a lot of this comes down to power. This isn't just limited to school settings, of course. We see the same, hear the same as well, and read the same shite when it comes to the government. Women-only shortlists in Scottish Parliament and Scottish political elections and whatnot. They have BAME-only shortlists or BAME-only candidates. That was what the SNP did a few years ago at the election. And there's talks or demands from activists to sort of have this commonplace every year going forward, every election. They want BAME-only shortlists as well. because we need to diversify the Scottish Parliament to reflect the progressive and diverse society of Scotland. Again, coming down to proportionate representation. 4% of Parliament should be brown and black because 4% of Scotland is not white. Okay, well, what happens when Scotland is 50% not white? Should Parliament be 50% not white? Should it be 50% or 70%, sorry, not white when the population of Scotland, demographically speaking, or demographically speaking even, is not white? It's a very, very dangerous and slippery slope. But anyway, folks, appreciate everybody tuning in. It's 2 hours on the dot. I'm going to go and have a fucking beer because it's been a long day and I've earned it. Peace out.